Imagine a blizzard so cold it freezes your breath in your lungs. Now, imagine you're trapped in it, with a starving killer bear on one side and armed men on the other. This isn't a movie. This is the true nightmare of Irina Volkov in the frozen hell of Yakutia. You won't believe who survives. The wind didn't just howl in Oymyakon. It screamed, a banshee tearing at the frozen throat of the world. At 72, Irina Volkov knew that sound better than her own heartbeat. She knew the way the ice fog the Hobbiton settled in the valley, thick enough to swallow a reindeer whole, silent enough to hide a predator until you felt its breath steam against your neck. Tonight, the mercury in the thermometer, outside her izba, her small wooden cabin, had plummeted past -50 degrees Celsius. The wood groaned under the pressure of the cold, snapping like pistol shots in the dark. Inside, the cast-iron stove, her only lifeline, glowed a dull, menacing cherry red, fed by the dwindling stack of birch logs she'd split with aching shoulders 3 days ago. Irina wasn't alone. Curled at her feet, a mass of fur and trembling muscle, was Misha. Not a dog, not a wolf, but something the villagers whispered about when she walked into the tiny general store in Tomtor. A polar bear cub. Or rather, what was left of one. He was undersized, the runt of a litter that hadn't survived the early thaw 2 years ago. His mother had been poached shop for a rug by men from the city who didn't understand the spirits of the tiger. Irina had found him bawling in a drift, half blind from frostbite, and brought him home in her coat. He was Misha, because he looked like the teddy bear her son, Sergei, had clutched the day he left for the army 20 years ago. The day before the letter came saying he wasn't coming back. "Hush now, Malish," she crooned, her hand buried in his coarse, white-yellow fur. Misha whined, a high-pitched, pitiful sound that vibrated through the floorboards. He sensed it too. The blizzard wasn't just weather. It was a siege. The door rattled violently. Not the wind. Irina froze. The heavy iron latch jumped. Someone, or something, was testing it. In Oymyakon, you didn't get visitors after dark. The only things that moved at -50 degrees Celsius were desperate beasts or desperate men, and the men were usually worse. She reached for the old double-barreled Toz, 3-4 shotgun leaning against the wall. It was unloaded. She kept the shells in a tin box on the mantelpiece, behind the icon of St. Nicholas. Her arthritis flared as she stood, her knees popping. "Who is there?" she called out, her voice cracking. Silence. Then, a heavy thud against the wood, shaking the dust from the ceiling beams. Misha scrambled up, growling low in his throat, placing his sturdy body between her and the door. He wasn't a cub anymore, he was a teenager in bear years. Heavy and strong, but terrified of thunder and loud noises. "Help. Me." The voice was faint, barely audible over the gale. It was human. Irina hesitated. The golden rule of the North. Never open the door to the dark. It could be a trick. It could be wolves mimicking a cry. Old superstitions died hard in her blood. But the voice came again. Weaker this time. Freezing. It was a woman's voice. Irina looked at Misha. The bear's ears were flat against his head, but he wasn't aggressive. He was curious. She unlatched the heavy bar. The wind slammed the door inward, knocking her back against the table. Snow exploded into the room, instantly coating the floor in white. A figure tumbled in with the snow, bundled in high-tech neon orange gear that looked alien against the rough-hewn logs of the cabin. Irina slammed her shoulder against the door, fighting the gale to close it. She latched it, breathing hard, the cold air burning her lungs. The figure on the floor groaned and rolled over. She pulled back a frosted hood to reveal a face blue with cold, blonde hair matted with ice. A young woman, maybe 30, American, European. "Water!" the stranger rasped. Irina moved quickly, grabbing the kettle from the stove. She poured hot water into a tin cup, mixing in a spoonful of dried lingonberries. "Drink," she commanded in Russian, holding the cup to the woman's lips. The stranger drank greedily, coughing as the warmth hit her chest. She looked up, her eyes widening as they landed on Misha, who was sniffing her boots with intense interest. "Is that a bear?" she whispered in English. Irina understood a little English enough from the radio. "Yes, Misha. He is. Family." The woman struggled to sit up. "My name is Sarah. Sarah Jenkins. My snowmobile broke down. My guide. He left to find help hours ago. He never came back. Irina's heart sank. A guide leaving a client in this weather? That was a death sentence. Where is guide? Near the river. The Indigirka. We were trying to film for a documentary. Sarah's teeth chattered violently. He said he saw tracks. Tiger tracks. He wanted to film them. Tiger? Irina frowned. No tigers here. Only wolves. And bears. He was sure. Sarah insisted, shivering. He took the rifle. Irina's blood ran cold. The rifle. This woman was defenseless. And if her guide was chasing tiger tracks near the Indigirka in a blizzard, he was likely chasing a ghost, or something worse. Suddenly, Misha let out a roar that shook the cabin walls. He spun around, facing the window. The heavy shutters were closed, but something had spooked him. Thump! Something heavy hit the roof. Irina looked up. The roof was sturdy, built to hold tons of snow, but this sound was distinct. Footsteps. Heavy, clawed footsteps. The storm, Irina whispered, grabbing the shotgun shells. Her hands shook as she fumbled to load the weapon. It brings the hungry ones. What is it? Sarah cried, scrambling back against the stove. Not tiger, Irina said grimly, snapping the barrel shut. Bear. A rogue. A shatun. A shatun was a bear that hadn't hibernated. Driven mad by hunger and cold, they were killing machines. They didn't fear fire. They didn't fear guns. They only knew the need to eat. And they hunted humans. The scratching above them grew louder. The shatun was tearing at the shingles. It smelled the warmth. It smelled the food. It smelled them. The first claw punched through the roof shingles with a sound like tearing canvas. Sarah screamed, scrambling backward until her back hit the wall. Misha stood on his hind legs, roaring at the ceiling, swiping at the falling debris. He was defending his territory, but Irina knew the difference between a hand-reared rescue and a wild, starving cannibal. "Get under the bed," Irina shouted, pointing to the heavy iron frame in the corner. Sarah didn't argue. She dove under the bed, clutching her knees. Irina raised the TOS 34. She had 2 shots. That was it. She aimed at the spot where the ceiling was buckling. The wood splintered, and a massive, black snout pushed through, sniffing the air. The smell hit them instantly, a stench of rotting meat and wet fur. Blam! The shot was deafening in the small space. The bear on the roof roared in pain, a sound that seemed to vibrate in Irina's teeth. Blood dripped through the hole, sizzling on the hot stove below. The creature scrambled, sliding down the steep pitch of the roof with a heavy thud into the snow outside. "Did you kill it?" Sarah whispered, peering out. "No," Irina said, her hands trembling as she broke the gun open to reload. She only had birdshot left. The slugs were in the shed outside. "Stupid old woman," she cursed herself. Complacent, I just made him angry. Silence stretched for a minute. The wind howled, masking any sound of movement outside. Then, the window shutter exploded. Wood and glass shattered inward. A massive black shape hurtled into the room, filling the space with violence. It was huge, emaciated, its ribs showing through patchy fur, eyes burning with a yellow, manic light. Misha didn't hesitate. With a bellow that sounded more like a protective mother than a cub, he charged the intruder. The 2 bears collided in a flurry of fur and teeth. The table was smashed to kindling. The shatun was larger, faster, and driven by a desperate hunger. It swiped at Misha, tearing a gash across his shoulder. Misha yelped but clamped his jaws onto the intruder's neck, holding on with bulldog tenacity. "Misha!" Irina screamed. She couldn't shoot. They were a tangling knot of fighting bears. If she fired, she might hit Misha. The shatun shook Misha off like a rag doll, throwing him against the stove. Misha cried out as his fur singed, scrambling away. The wild bear turned its gaze on Irina. It rose on its hind legs, towering over her, drool swinging from its jaws. Irina raised the gun, knowing the birdshot would only sting at this range. Suddenly, a bright red flare erupted in the room. Sarah had crawled out from under the bed, holding a marine flare, part of her survival gear. She struck it, filling the cabin with blinding, sputtering red light and choking sulfur smoke. The Shatoon, blinded and confused by the unnatural fire, roared and swiped the air. "Get out!" Sarah yelled, waving the flare. "Go!" Irina grabbed Misha by the scruff of his neck. "Come!" They tumbled out into the blizzard, the cold hitting them like a physical blow. The snow was waist deep. The wind knocked Irina down instantly. "Where do we go?" Sarah shouted, the flare sputtering in the wind. "The shed!" Irina pointed to a small structure 20 meters away. It was solid logs, where she kept the generator and the heavy tools. And the slugs, they waded through the snow, the wind tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the cabin glowed eerily red. The Shatoon roared from inside, thrashing against the walls. They reached the shed. Irina fumbled with the padlock, her fingers numb and useless. "Let me!" A crash from the cabin. The bear had broken down the door. It was coming. "Hurry!" Irina screamed. Sarah smashed it again. The hasp broke. They threw themselves inside, dragging Misha with them, and slammed the heavy door just as a heavy weight impacted against it. Darkness. The shed was pitch black, smelling of gasoline and sawdust. Outside, the Shatoon threw itself against the door again and again. "He will get in," Irina said, her voice hollow. Sarah shone the last dying light of the flare around the shed. "Is there a weapon here? Anything?" Irina looked around. A chainsaw, an axe, and on the shelf, the box of slugs. But before she could reach for them, a new sound cut through the storm. A gunshot. Crisp. Sharp. A rifle shot. Then another. The bear outside went silent. "What was that?" Sarah whispered. Irina listened. A low mechanical hum was growing louder. "An engine. A snowcat," Irina breathed. "The Rangers." But relief was premature. The door to the shed didn't open. Instead, a voice shouted from outside, barely audible over the wind. "Irina Volkov, come out!" Irina's blood froze harder than the ice outside. She knew that voice. It wasn't the Rangers. It was Victor, the man who had poached Misha's mother, the man who ran the illegal hunting rings for wealthy tourists. "Why is he here?" Sarah asked, seeing the terror on Irina's face. "He is not here to save us," Irina whispered, clutching Misha's fur. "He is here to clean up. Your guide. He didn't leave you." Victor found him. Sarah's eyes widened. "What? If they find you here, alive," Irina said, looking at the young woman, "they go to prison." The shed door rattled. Not by a bear this time, but by men with rifles. "Open up, babushka," Victor sneered through the wood. "Don't make us burn you out." Irina looked at the heavy chainsaw in the corner. She looked at the terrified American girl. She looked at her wounded bear. "We do not die today," Irina said, her voice changing. The fear evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard steel of a woman who had survived 70 winters in the harshest place on Earth. She picked up the box of slugs and loaded the TOZ. 3, 4, Sarah, she said quietly. "Can you drive a snowmobile?" "Yes." Sarah nodded. "Good. Because we are going to steal theirs." Irina kicked the shed door open. The door to the shed exploded outward, not from the force of the wind, but from the sheer will of a woman protecting her family. Irina stepped into the swirling white chaos. The TOZ. 3-4 shotgun leveled at the chest of the man standing nearest the snowmobiles. It was Victor's hired hand, a man named Karl. He froze, his rifle half raised, eyes widening as he saw the barrel of the old hunting gun aimed at his heart. But what terrified him more was the low, rumbling growl emanating from the darkness behind Irina. "Back away," Irina commanded, her voice cutting through the gale. "You're making a mistake, old woman," Victor shouted, stepping out from behind the lead snowmobile. He was dressed in expensive Arctic camouflage, a high-powered rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "Put the gun down. We can discuss this warm inside. Maybe the American girl just had an accident." "The only accident," Irina spat, "is that you were born." At that moment, the Shatoon, the rogue bear everyone assumed was dead, erupted from the snowdrift where it had fallen. It didn't care about alliances or guns. It saw movement, and it charged. It slammed into Karl, knocking him 10 feet into the deep snow. The man screamed, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the sky. Move! Irina shoved Sarah toward the nearest snowmobile, a heavy-duty Yamaha Viking. Chaos swallowed the clearing. Victor spun around, firing at the rogue bear that was currently mauling his henchman. The muzzle flashes lit up the night like strobe lights. Sarah jumped onto the driver's seat, jamming the key in. The engine sputtered, coughing against the cold. "It won't start! Choke it!" Irina yelled, throwing herself onto the passenger seat behind Sarah. She whistled piercingly. Misha, confused by the noise and the scent of blood, hesitated near the shed. The rogue bear, having finished with Karl, turned its flat, dead eyes toward Misha. "Misha!" Irina screamed, abandoning her cover to reach for him. Misha bolted, not away from the danger, but toward Irina. He scrambled onto the wide cargo sled, attached to the back of the Yamaha, a wooden platform usually used for hauling wood. He curled into a ball, his claws digging into the wood. Sarah slammed the starter again. The engine roared to life. She gunned the throttle, and the tracks spun on the ice, gripping suddenly. The machine lurched forward, throwing Irina back against Sarah. They tore out of the yard just as Victor turned his rifle toward them. A bullet pinged off the metal cowling of the engine, inches from Sarah's knee. "Go! To the river!" Irina shouted into Sarah's ear. They plunged into the black void of the blizzard. The headlight of the snowmobile cut a cone of light only 10 feet long. Everything beyond was a wall of driving snow. Sarah drove by instinct and terror, the handlebars shaking violently as they smashed over drifts and hidden stumps. "He is coming!" Irina yelled, looking back. Through the curtain of snow, a single headlight was bobbing, growing larger. Victor was an expert tracker and a better driver. He was closing the gap. They hit the Indigirka River, a massive, frozen serpent of ice. This was the winter road, the only highway in this desolate part of the world. But in a blizzard, it was a death trap. The ice shifted. Pressure ridges formed walls of jagged concrete hard ice. Polynius patches of open water that never froze waited to swallow machines whole. "Faster!" Irina urged. "I can't see!" Sarah screamed back, wiping ice from her goggles. "Trust the bumps. If it feels smooth, it is thin ice. Keep to the rough." The headlight behind them grew brighter. A crack echoed, not ice, but a rifle shot. Victor was firing from his moving machine. Irina huddled over the back of the seat, trying to shield Misha in the sled. He was a creature of the wild, yes, but he had been raised on porridge and affection. "Hold on," Sarah shrieked. A massive pressure ridge loomed out of the dark, a wall of ice 6 feet high. Sarah yanked the handlebars hard to the left. The snowmobile tilted dangerously, one ski lifting off the ground. Misha slid, his claws screeching on the wood. He nearly tumbled off, but Irina grabbed his thick fur with one hand. Her other arm locked around the seat handle. Her shoulder screamed in protest, arthritis burning like fire, but she didn't let go. "I have you, Malish," she gritted out. "I have you." Behind them, Victor didn't slow down. He ramped the side of the pressure ridge, his machine launching into the air. He landed with a bone-jarring thud just 20 meters behind them. He was playing a game with them. He could have shot them by now, but he was herding them. "He is driving us to the Black Water," Irina realized with horror. The Black Water was a notorious section of the river where thermal springs kept the ice dangerously thin. If they went there, they would go through. "Sarah, turn right, into the forest. There are trees, better trees than water. Turn." Sarah wrestled the machine toward the bank. They hit the tree line hard, branches whipping their faces and helmets. The snow here was softer, deeper. The machine bogged down, the engine whining in protest. The headlight behind them stopped. Victor had stopped on the river ice. He wasn't following them into the trees. "Why did he stop?" Sarah panted, slowing down. "He knows," Irina whispered. "He knows this engine will overheat in the deep powder." As if on cue, the temperature light on the dashboard flickered red. Steam began to hiss from the cowling. "We have to stop," Sarah said, "or it will blow. If we stop, we freeze," Irina said. "Or he kills us." She looked around. They were in a dense cluster of larch trees. It was a graveyard of silence. "Kill the engine," Irina commanded. "We wait." Sarah cut the power. The silence that rushed in was heavy, broken only by the wind in the treetops and Misha's heavy, panicked breathing. Irina climbed off, her legs shaking. She checked the shotgun. 1 shell left. "He will come on foot," Irina whispered. "He wants to enjoy this. He is a hunter who likes the kill." She looked at Misha. The bear was shivering, ice forming on his whiskers. "Sarah," Irina said softly, "take the flare gun. If he comes from the left, you shoot. I take the right." "What about Misha?" Irina took off her heavy sheepskin mittens and stroked the bear's head. "Misha," she whispered in Russian, "you must be a brave boy now. No more teddy bear." A twig snapped, not from the left, not from the right, from above. Irina looked up just as a dark shape dropped from the branches. It wasn't Victor. It was snow. A massive shelf of it dislodged by the wind. It buried Irina to her waist. She gasped, fighting to breathe, struggling to pull herself out, but the noise had given them away. "There you are," a voice boomed from the darkness. A spotlight beam cut through the trees, blinding them. Victor stood 30 yards away, behind the trunk of a massive larch. He was smart. He didn't expose himself. "Irina, Irina," he called out, his voice mocking. "You are making this very hard. Just give me the girl. You can keep your pet, I promise." "Liar," Irina shouted, racking the slide of her shotgun. "The guide was a fool," Victor replied calmly. "He saw things that didn't belong to him. Like you." A shot rang out. The windshield of the snowmobile shattered, showering Sarah with glass. She screamed, covering her head. "Next one is for the bear," Victor laughed. Irina's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't see him. "Misha, stay," she commanded, pushing the bear down behind the sled. She stood up, exposing herself to the light. "I'm an old woman, Victor," she yelled, spreading her arms. "I have lived my life. Let the girl go. She knows nothing. She has a camera." Victor's voice drifted closer. "And she has eyes." "No deals." He stepped out from the tree line, rifle raised. He was 20 yards away, too far for the birdshot to be lethal, but close enough for his rifle to end her. "Goodbye, babushka," he sneered. Irina closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. Click. A misfire. The old shell, damp from years of storage, had failed. Irina stared at the gun in horror. Victor laughed, a cruel, barking sound. He adjusted his aim, centering the crosshairs on her chest. "Pity," he said. Suddenly, a white blur launched itself from behind the sled. It wasn't a roar. It was a sound of pure, primal fury. Misha didn't run on all fours. He bounded, covering the ground with terrifying speed. Victor swung the rifle, surprised. He fired. The bullet struck Misha in the shoulder. The bear stumbled, rolling in the snow, a yelp of pain escaping him. "No!" Irina screamed, grabbing the axe from the side of the snowmobile, but Misha didn't stop. The pain seemed to flip a switch in his brain. The domestic pet was gone. The apex predator had arrived. He regained his footing in a split second and lunged. Victor didn't have time to chamber another round. He raised the rifle to block, but a 500-pound polar bear is a force of nature. Misha swatted the rifle aside like a twig and slammed into Victor, driving him into the snow. The man screamed as jaws clamped onto his padded arm. He flailed, trying to reach for his knife. "Misha, off!" Irina yelled, running forward. Not to save Victor, but to save Misha. If Victor got his knife out, he would gut the bear. Irina reached them. Victor was kicking wildly. He managed to pull a long hunting knife from his belt. He raised it to plunge it into Misha's neck. Irina didn't think. She swung the axe. It wasn't a lethal blow, she wasn't a killer. She struck Victor's hand, the blunt side of the axe crushing his fingers. The knife flew into the darkness. Victor howled, curling into a ball. Misha stood over him, growling, drool mixed with blood dripping onto the man's expensive coat. The bear looked at Irina, waiting for a command. Irina stood over the poaching kingpin, her chest heaving, the axe heavy in her hand. "It is over, Victor," she said, her voice like ice. She grabbed Misha's collar. "Heel." Misha hesitated, then stepped back, licking his wounded shoulder. Victor groaned, clutching his broken hand. "You..." You can't leave me here. I am not leaving you, Irina said, reaching into Victor's pocket and pulling out his satellite phone. I am calling the Rangers. They will come. She looked at the storm. If you survive the night, you go to prison. If you don't, well, the wolves have to eat too. She turned to Sarah, who was staring in shock. Get on the machine. We go home. 3 months later, the sun had returned to Oymyakon. The snow was melting, revealing the brown earth and the first hints of green grass. Irina sat on her porch, a cup of tea in her hand. Misha was sprawled in the mud nearby, chewing on a massive beef bone. He had a slight limp, and a patch of white fur on his shoulder was missing, replaced by a jagged scar. A mail truck rattled down the muddy track. The postman, old Yuri, waved and handed her a thick package. From America, he said, winking. Irina opened it. Inside was a glossy magazine and a DVD case. The cover of the DVD showed a dramatic image: a blizzard, a woman's face, and the shadow of a great white bear. There was a letter. Dear Irina, the doctors say my frostbite will heal completely. They say I was lucky. I tell them luck had nothing to do with it. I told the world your story. Victor is in a prison hospital, and his ring has been dismantled. You are a hero here, but I know you hate that word. Enclosed is a donation to the Yakutia Wildlife Fund, in Misha's name. Thank you for the tea. Thank you for the life. Love, Sarah. Irina smiled, the cracks in her weathered face deepening. She looked at Misha. The bear looked up, sensing her attention, and let out a soft woof. Hero, she scoffed softly, sipping her tea. Silly Americans, I am just a mother. She reached down and scratched the bear behind the ears. And you are just a good boy. This story reminds us that even in the coldest corners of the earth, the warmth of a mother's protective instinct, whether for a human or a bear, burns the brightest. Irina didn't just save a documentarian. She proved that loyalty transcends species. The bond between the woman and the bear wasn't just about survival. It was about family. If Misha's bravery gave you chills, hit that like button. What would you do if you were trapped in a blizzard with a wild predator? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more incredible true stories of survival against the odds. Stay safe, and see you in the next video.